I rolled out of bed before my alarm even went off, already wide awake with that buzzing energy that comes when something good is finally happening. Today was the day. After weeks of Ryan talking about this camping trip, planning every detail, and me pestering my parents for permission, we were actually doing it. My sleeping bag sat rolled up in the corner of my room where I'd left it the night before, borrowed from our neighbor Mr. Chen since we didn't own any camping gear. The thing was probably older than me, with that musty smell that never quite goes away, but I didn't care. It was real camping equipment, and that made me feel like I was already halfway to being the kind of person who knew how to survive in the wilderness. I grabbed the small backpack I'd managed to put together with help from my mom, a few changes of clothes, some snacks she'd insisted on packing, a water bottle, and the cheap flashlight Dad had picked up from the hardware store. Not much compared to what Ryan would bring, but it was mine. The house was quiet. My parents were still asleep, which was probably for the best since Mom had spent most of yesterday evening listing all the ways this trip could go wrong. Bears, getting lost, falling off cliffs, food poisoning from improperly cooked camp food. Dad had finally convinced her that Ryan Thompson was responsible enough to keep me safe, pointing out that Ryan had been camping with his older brother Sean for years without incident. I trusted Ryan completely. He was 17 to my 15, and those 2 years felt like a lifetime of experience when it came to things like this. Ryan knew the mountains behind our neighborhood better than anyone. He'd been hiking those trails since he was my age, first with Sean, then on his own as he got older. The stories he'd told me about their adventures made me jealous every time. Sleeping under the stars, building fires from scratch, shooting at targets with Sean's rifle. Real outdoor stuff that I'd only seen in movies. Now it was my turn. I checked the clock. Still hours before Ryan was supposed to show up, but I couldn't go back to sleep. Instead, I double-checked my pack for the 5th time, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything important. The excitement was almost overwhelming. This wasn't going to be some family camping trip to a crowded state park with bathrooms and picnic tables. Ryan had promised to teach me actual survival skills. How to build a fire without matches if necessary. How to purify water from a stream. How to shoot his dad's rifle safely and accurately. The rifle part made me nervous and excited at the same time. Ryan had been talking about it for weeks, promising to show me proper shooting techniques and safety procedures. His dad had agreed to let him bring it as long as Ryan followed all the rules they'd established over the years. I'd never held a real gun before, let alone fired one. Mom would probably have another anxiety attack if she knew about that particular plan, which was why we'd decided not to mention it. I wandered downstairs and found Dad already in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, reading something on his phone. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, looking up with a knowing smile. "Too excited, I guess." He nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "I remember my first real camping trip. Your grandfather took me and your Uncle Jim up to the lake when I was about your age. I was awake at 5 in the morning, packed and ready to go." "Were you nervous?" "Terrified," he admitted with a laugh. "But it ended up being one of the best weekends of my life. Sometimes the things that scare you a little are worth doing." That made me feel better. Dad wasn't usually the outdoorsy type, but he understood why this mattered to me. Mom meant well with all her worrying, but Dad got it. This was about more than just sleeping in a tent. It was about proving I could handle something real and challenging. The morning dragged by. I tried watching TV but couldn't focus on anything. I attempted to start a book, but kept reading the same paragraph over and over. Eventually, I gave up and just sat on the front porch, watching the street and waiting for Ryan to appear. When he finally showed up in the early afternoon, I saw him coming from 3 blocks away. The rifle case slung over his shoulder was unmistakable, along with the massive backpack that looked like it could hold everything needed for a week in the wilderness. Ryan walked with that easy confidence he always had, like he belonged wherever he happened to be. "Ready for this?" he called out as he approached the house. "Been ready since 6 this morning." Ryan grinned, dropping his pack on our front steps. "Good. This is going to be awesome. I found the perfect spot last time I was up there. Hidden from the main trails, right next to this stream where the water's clear. You'll love it." Mom came outside then, probably drawn by our voices, and immediately looked at the rifle case with obvious concern. "That's staying properly secured, right?" she asked Ryan directly. "Yes, ma'am, Mrs. Martinez. My dad went over all the safety rules with me again this morning. It'll be locked in the case except when we're doing target practice, and Tyler won't handle it without supervision." "And you know exactly where you're going?" "I've been to this spot 4 times already. It's about 3 miles up the mountain, following the trail that starts behind Tyler's neighborhood. The area's well marked, and I've got my GPS and compass as backup." Mom looked like she wanted to ask more questions, but Dad appeared behind her and put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "They'll be fine, Sarah. Ryan knows what he's doing." I shouldered my pack and said goodbye to my parents. Mom hugged me longer than usual, reminding me to be careful and to call if anything went wrong. Dad shook Ryan's hand and told him to take good care of me. Ryan and I walked to the end of our street where the paved road gave way to a dirt trail leading up into the foothills. I'd walked this path dozens of times, but never with the intention of actually camping overnight. It felt different now, more significant. "So, what's the plan?" I asked as we started up the trail. "Hike to the campsite first. It's a decent climb, probably take us 2 to 3 hours depending on how many breaks we need. Once we get there, we'll set up camp, gather firewood, and I'll show you how to prepare a proper campsite. Then target practice while we still have good light, and after that we'll work on building a fire from scratch." The whole schedule sounded perfect, challenging but manageable, with Ryan there to guide me through everything. I'd been waiting for this opportunity for months, ever since Ryan first mentioned wanting to share his camping knowledge with someone who'd actually appreciate it. We started up the mountain trail, leaving the familiar suburban streets behind. The path was steeper than I'd expected, winding through increasingly dense pine forest as we climbed higher. Ryan moved at a steady pace that looked effortless, while I found myself working harder to keep up. His heavy pack didn't seem to slow him down at all. "Take your time," Ryan said when he noticed me breathing hard after the first mile. "This isn't a race. The whole point is to enjoy being out here." I nodded, grateful for the reminder. This was about learning and experiencing something new, not proving how tough I was. Ryan had the patience to teach me properly, and I was lucky to have a friend willing to share this kind of adventure. The trees grew thicker as we climbed, and I could see why Ryan loved coming up here. The farther we got from town, the more peaceful everything became. No traffic noise, no neighbors, just the sound of our footsteps on the trail and air through the pine branches. This was exactly what I'd been hoping for. The trail grew steeper after the first mile, winding through switchbacks that made my legs burn with each step. What had started as an easy walk through known territory quickly turned into something that tested every muscle I didn't know I had. Ryan moved ahead of me with that same steady pace, his massive pack bouncing slightly with each step, but he never seemed to slow down or need a break. I tried to match his rhythm at first, but within minutes I was breathing hard and falling behind. The backpack straps dug into my shoulders and sweat started collecting under the waistband despite the cool mountain air. Ryan had warned me the hike would be challenging, but I'd figured my regular bike rides around the neighborhood had prepared me for this. I was wrong. "Doing okay back there?" Ryan called over his shoulder when he noticed the growing distance between us. "Yeah, just..." I paused to catch my breath, taking in the scenery. He grinned and waited for me to catch up. "It gets easier once your body adjusts to the altitude. We're climbing pretty fast right now." The pine trees had grown thicker around us, blocking out most of the afternoon sun, and creating a cover overhead that made the air feel cooler and damper. Everything smelled like sap and fallen needles, that sharp, clean scent I'd only experienced during family drives through the mountains. Being surrounded by it, walking through it instead of just passing by in a car, felt completely different. Ryan pointed to a cluster of granite boulders ahead. Good place for a water break. We're about halfway there. I nodded gratefully and followed him to the rocks, where I immediately dropped my pack and collapsed onto the nearest flat surface. My legs felt like jelly, and I was breathing hard. Ryan sat down beside me, pulling out his water bottle and taking a measured sip. He wasn't even breathing hard. "First time hiking with a full pack?" he asked. "First time hiking, period, unless you count walking around the lake." "That doesn't count," Ryan said with a laugh. "But you're doing fine. Most people want to turn around after the first hour." I took a long drink from my water bottle, grateful for the cool liquid. The thought of turning around had definitely crossed my mind, but I wasn't about to admit that. This whole trip meant too much to me to give up, because of some sore legs and shortness of breath. After 10 minutes, Ryan stood up and put his pack back on. "Ready to keep going? The best part is still ahead." The next section of trail proved even more challenging, with loose rocks that moved under my feet and roots that seemed designed to trip me up. I fell behind again, stopping every few hundred yards to catch my breath and rest my burning leg muscles. Ryan kept encouraging me, never making me feel like I was slowing him down or ruining the trip. "Look for the blazes on the trees," he called back to me during one of my breaks. "Orange paint marks. They'll keep you on the right path if you ever do this hike solo." I'd noticed the painted marks but hadn't realized their significance. Ryan seemed to know everything about being in the mountains, from reading trail signs to understanding which plants were safe to touch. Watching him navigate the terrain made me feel like a complete beginner, but also grateful to have such an experienced guide. The forest around us gradually changed as we climbed higher. The trees grew taller and more spread out, with patches of sunlight breaking through the overhead cover to light up the trail ahead. I could hear the sound of running water somewhere in the distance, which Ryan confirmed was the stream near our campsite. "Almost there," he said during our final rest stop. "Maybe another 20 minutes. Those last 20 minutes felt like an hour. But finally, the trail opened into a clearing that took my breath away for reasons that had nothing to do with the altitude. The campsite Ryan had chosen sat beside a stream that ran crystal clear over smooth rocks, surrounded by tall pines that formed a natural border around the open space. The water made a gentle rushing sound as it flowed past, and I could see small fish darting between the rocks in the shallows. "This is perfect," I said, dropping my pack and walking to the edge of the stream. Ryan was already unpacking his gear, laying out the tent and various camping supplies with practiced efficiency. "I found this spot about 6 months ago. Nobody else seems to know about it, probably because it's not marked on any of the trail maps." I knelt beside the stream and cupped some of the water in my hands. It was shockingly cold and looked clean enough to drink straight from the source, though I remembered Ryan mentioning something about water purification tablets. "First thing we need to do is get the tent set up before it gets dark," Ryan said, unrolling what looked like a complicated collection of fabric and poles. "Want to learn how this works?" I walked over to where he was laying out the tent components. The whole thing looked way more complex than the simple camping gear I'd seen in stores, with multiple guy lines and stakes and poles that connected in ways I couldn't immediately figure out. "Start by laying out the footprint," Ryan said, handing me a piece of waterproof fabric. "This goes underneath the tent to protect the floor from rocks and moisture." I spread the footprint across a level patch of ground, making sure it was positioned away from any obvious rocks or tree roots. Ryan helped me adjust it until he was satisfied with the placement. Then we unfolded the actual tent on top. "These are the main support poles," he explained, showing me how to connect the shock-corded sections. "They thread through these sleeves in the fabric. Take your time and don't force anything." Working together, we managed to get the tent structure put together and upright. Ryan showed me how to stake down the corners and adjust the guy lines to keep everything tight and stable. When he handed me the hammer to drive in the stakes, I expected to mess it up somehow, but each one went into the ground clean and straight. "Nice work," Ryan said, checking my stake placement. "You're getting the hang of this." The feeling of accomplishment was stronger than I'd expected. Such a simple task, but doing it right felt like proof that I belonged out here, that I could learn these skills and become the kind of person who was comfortable in the wilderness. With the tent secured, Ryan showed me how to identify good firewood. We walked through the trees around our campsite, and he pointed out the differences between wood that would burn well and branches that were too green or too rotten to be useful. "Look for stuff that's been dead for a while but hasn't started decomposing," he said, breaking a branch in half to show me the dry, solid interior. "It should snap cleanly, not bend or feel spongy." We spent the next hour collecting wood, separating it into piles based on size and thickness. Ryan explained how different types of wood served different purposes in building and maintaining a fire. Small twigs and bark for tinder, pencil-thick branches for kindling, and larger pieces for the main fuel once the fire was established. The physical work felt good after hours of hiking. My legs were still sore, but moving around the campsite and gathering wood helped work out some of the stiffness. The late afternoon sun came through the pine branches, and the sound of the stream provided a constant, peaceful background noise. "Think we've got enough for tonight?" I asked, looking at our accumulated wood pile. Ryan nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Probably enough for tomorrow morning, too. Now let's take care of the water situation." He led me back to the stream and pulled a small bottle of tablets from his pack. "This water looks clean, but you never know what might be upstream. Always better to be safe." I watched him fill our water bottles from a spot where the current ran fast over smooth rocks, then add the purification tablets to each one. The tablets dissolved quickly, leaving just a faint chemical smell that Ryan assured me would fade by the time we needed to drink. The sun was getting lower in the sky. Everything we'd accomplished, the hike, setting up the tent, gathering firewood, preparing our water, felt like real achievements. This wasn't just playing at camping or pretending to be outdoorsy. We'd actually done it. Created a functional camp in the wilderness using skills that Ryan was patiently teaching me. I sat on a fallen log beside our fire ring, watching Ryan organize his gear and prepare for the evening ahead. The clearing around us was quiet except for the stream and occasional bird calls from the surrounding forest. No traffic noise, no neighbor conversations, no familiar suburban sounds. Just us and the mountains and the approaching night. The shadows had grown longer while we organized our gear, and I could feel the temperature starting to drop as the sun disappeared behind the tree line. Ryan pulled his rifle case from where he'd secured it against a large pine tree and began checking the contents with methodical precision. "Perfect timing for target practice," he said, lifting the rifle out and examining it carefully. "We've got maybe an hour of good light left." Watching him handle the weapon made my stomach flutter with nervous energy. The rifle looked heavier and more serious than I'd expected, with dark metal and worn wood that showed years of use. Ryan treated it with obvious respect, keeping the barrel pointed toward the ground as he moved around our campsite. He walked to the far end of the clearing and began setting up empty cans along a fallen log about 30 yards away. The metallic clanking bounced off the surrounding trees as he spaced them evenly, creating clear targets against the darkening forest background. When he returned, his expression had changed to something more serious and focused. "First rule," Ryan said, holding the rifle so I could see it clearly. "Always assume it's loaded, even when you know it isn't. Second rule, never point it at anything you don't intend to destroy. Third rule, Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot." I nodded, trying to absorb every detail. The responsibility felt heavier than I'd anticipated. This wasn't like the video games I'd played or the movies I'd watched. This was real, and one mistake could have consequences I didn't want to think about. Ryan demonstrated proper stance, showing me how to position my feet and shoulders. His movements were smooth and confident, the result of years of practice with Sean. He explained breathing techniques, how to align the sights, and the importance of squeezing the trigger slowly rather than jerking it. "Most people try to rush the shot," he said, raising the rifle to demonstrate proper form. "Take your time, breathe naturally, and squeeze on the exhale." When he fired his demonstration shot, the sharp crack echoed through the forest and made me jump despite expecting it. One of the cans flew backward off the log, spinning in the air before landing in the brush behind the makeshift target range. "Your turn," Ryan said, engaging the safety and handing me the rifle. The weapon felt stiff and strange in my hands, heavier than I'd expected and hard to control in ways that made me nervous about every movement. Ryan stood beside me, adjusting my grip and stance with patient guidance. His hands covered mine briefly, showing me the proper finger placement and how to find the right balance. "Remember what I showed you about breathing," he said as I raised the rifle toward the targets. "Don't hold your breath, that'll make you shake. Just breathe normally and fire when it feels natural." My first shot went wide, kicking up dirt somewhere behind the targets without coming close to any of the cans. The recoil surprised me, pushing back against my shoulder harder than I'd expected. Ryan made small adjustments to my stance and reminded me to keep my cheek firmly against the stock. The second shot was closer but still missed everything. The third clipped the edge of the log, sending wood chips flying but leaving all the cans untouched. I started getting frustrated and embarrassed that I couldn't hit targets that looked so easy when Ryan was shooting. "Don't get discouraged," Ryan said, watching me reload. "Sean missed his first 20 shots when Dad started teaching him. This stuff takes practice." The encouragement helped, but I still felt like I was letting both of us down. All those weeks of anticipating this moment, imagining myself becoming competent with outdoor skills, and I couldn't even hit a stationary can from 30 yards away. Ryan made more adjustments to my form, explaining how small changes in grip or stance could affect accuracy. He showed me how to use the rifle sling for additional stability, and reminded me about trigger control. His patience never wavered, even as I missed shot after shot. On my 7th attempt, something clicked. The rifle felt more natural in my hands. The breathing came easier, and when I squeezed the trigger, I watched one of the center cans explode backward in a satisfying metallic clatter. "There you go!" Ryan shouted, grinning with genuine excitement. "Perfect shot!" The rush of success was stronger than anything I'd felt during our hike or camp setup. Actually hitting the target, proving I could learn these skills and apply them successfully, made me feel like I'd crossed some important line. This wasn't just playing at being outdoorsy anymore. I'd actually done something that required real skill and concentration. My next shot missed, but the one after that sent another can spinning off the log. Ryan's pride was obvious, and he clapped me on the shoulder with the kind of enthusiasm that made me understand why he enjoyed teaching these skills. 2 out of 10 isn't bad for a first session, he said as we walked down to collect the scattered cans. Most people take weeks to hit anything consistently. We spent a few more minutes cleaning up the target area, making sure we hadn't left any trash that would mess up the clean campsite. Ryan talked about the importance of leaving no trace, explaining how responsible campers made sure these beautiful spots stayed nice for future visitors. Back at our camp, Ryan carefully cleaned the rifle and put it in its case before storing it in the tent. Watching him handle the weapon with such careful attention showed me how seriously he took safety and responsibility. These weren't just rules his father had taught him. They were principles he'd learned and would pass along to anyone he mentored. With target practice done and the rifle safely stored, We turned our attention to building the evening fire. The temperature had dropped a lot as darkness came closer, making the idea of a warm fire more and more appealing. Ryan showed me how to arrange the tinder in the center of our fire ring, creating a small nest of dry bark and pine needles that would catch easily from a match flame. Around this, he built a careful structure of kindling, leaving gaps for airflow while making sure the smaller branches would catch fire from the burning tinder. Fire needs 3 things, he explained as we worked together: fuel, oxygen, and heat. Take away any one of those and the fire dies. Most people pile everything too close together and smother it before it gets going. I followed his demonstration, arranging pencil-thick branches in a loose teepee pattern around our tinder nest. The structure looked fragile and likely to collapse, but Ryan assured me it would hold together long enough for the fire to establish itself. Once this gets burning good, we'll add the bigger pieces one at a time, he said, striking a match and holding it to the tinder. Patience is the key. The tinder caught immediately, sending small flames dancing through the dry material. I watched nervously as the fire spread to the kindling, worried it might go out before establishing itself properly. Several small branches caught and began burning steadily, creating enough heat to light the larger pieces Ryan had carefully positioned. Perfect, he said, adding slightly thicker branches to the growing flames. Want to try building the next layer? He handed me a few pieces of wood about as thick as my thumb and showed me where to place them for maximum effect. The fire responded well to each addition, growing stronger and more stable as we fed it progressively larger fuel. When I successfully added a piece as thick as my wrist without disturbing the flames that were already going, I felt another surge of accomplishment. My second attempt at lighting a fire from scratch went even better than the first. Ryan let me handle most of the process myself, only offering guidance when I hesitated or made small mistakes. When the flames caught and began spreading through my carefully arranged structure, the satisfaction was enormous. "You're getting good at this," Ryan said, settling onto one of the logs we'd positioned around the fire ring. "Most people need weeks of practice before they can build a fire that reliable." The flames made dancing light across our campsite, changing the clearing we knew into something magical and primitive. Dark areas moved and changed position among the trees around us, and the sound of crackling wood mixed with the constant murmur of the nearby stream. The air smelled like pine smoke and burning wood, a combination that made everything feel more real and immediate. Ryan pulled a bag of marshmallows from his pack and handed me a long metal rod designed for roasting. The simple activity felt perfect for the moment, not too challenging after our successful target practice and fire building, but engaging enough to keep our hands busy while we talked. "Sean and I have been camping all over Colorado," Ryan said, carefully positioning his marshmallow over the flames. "There's this spot up near Breckenridge where you can see 3 different mountain ranges on a clear day, and another place near Durango where the stream runs right through a natural rock formation that looks like cathedral arches." I listened to his descriptions while rotating my marshmallow to achieve even browning. The stories painted pictures of wilderness adventures that seemed almost mythical in scope. Week-long backcountry trips, encounters with wildlife, nights spent under stars so bright they provided natural navigation. "Have you ever seen a bear?" I asked, pulling my perfectly golden marshmallow away from the heat. "Twice," Ryan said, grinning at the memory. "Both times they were more interested in getting away from us than causing trouble. Black bears are mostly just big, curious animals, nothing like the grizzlies you see in Alaska documentaries." The conversation flowed easily as we roasted marshmallow after marshmallow, sharing stories and observations about everything from school friends to family dynamics to dreams about future adventures. Ryan's easy manner made it simple to open up about things I'd never discussed with anyone else. "I've always felt like I was missing something," I told him, watching the flames dance hypnotically. Like everyone else knew these outdoor skills, and I was stuck inside playing video games and reading about adventures instead of having them. That's exactly how I felt before Sean started taking me along, Ryan said. He didn't want his little brother tagging along at first, but Dad made him include me. Best thing that ever happened to me. The stars had begun appearing overhead, visible through gaps in the pine trees above. Without city lights to compete with their brightness, they looked brighter and more numerous than I'd ever seen them. The crackling fire, star-filled sky, and easy conversation with my best friend made me feel more content than I'd ever felt before. Ryan pointed out several constellations, sharing stories Sean had taught him about navigation using star patterns. The knowledge seemed both practical and romantic, connecting our modern camping trip to centuries of human exploration and adventure. This is exactly what I hoped it would be like, I said, leaning back against my log and looking up at the expanding field of stars. What do you mean? All of it. The hike, learning to shoot, building the fire, sitting here talking. I've been imagining this for months, but actually doing it is even better than I expected. Ryan nodded, stirring the fire with a long stick and sending sparks flying up into the darkness. There's something about being out here that makes everything else seem less important. All the school drama and family stress and future planning, none of it matters when you're just focused on keeping the fire going and enjoying the moment. The peaceful feeling got stronger as we sat together in comfortable silence. The fire kept us warm against the cool mountain air. The stream made its constant, gentle noise, and the forest around us felt safe rather than scary. Everything about the experience made me more confident that I belonged in places like this. I couldn't remember ever feeling happier or more content than I did sitting beside that fire, full of successfully roasted marshmallows, surrounded by wilderness I was learning to navigate and appreciate. The day had given me everything I'd hoped for and more, proving that months of waiting and planning had been worth it. This was exactly what camping was supposed to be like. I was in the middle of asking Ryan about his favorite camping spot when he suddenly stopped responding. Not just stopped talking, stopped everything. His marshmallow roasting stick froze halfway to his mouth and his whole body went stiff like he'd heard something that needed his complete attention. "What is it?" I asked, looking around our campsite for whatever had caught his focus. Ryan's head turned slowly toward the dark tree line beyond our fire's reach. The flames gave enough light to show maybe 15 feet in any direction, but past that, everything dissolved into solid black. I followed his stare, trying to see whatever had grabbed his attention so completely. Nothing. Just pine trees creating thick darkness and the occasional movement of branches in the mountain breeze. "Ryan," I tried again, keeping my voice low in case he was listening for something specific. He raised his hand without looking at me, fingers spread in a clear signal for silence. His entire posture had changed from the relaxed, friendly guy who'd been teaching me outdoor skills all day. Now he sat forward on his log, shoulders tense, head tilted like a hunting dog picking up a scent. The fire crackled between us, sending sparks spiraling up toward the stars. Our collected firewood sat in neat piles beside the ring, and the stream continued its gentle murmur a few yards away. Everything looked exactly the same as it had moments before, but something felt different. The comfortable bubble of warmth and safety that had surrounded our camp suddenly seemed fragile. Ryan remained motionless for what felt like several minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. His eyes never left the darkness beyond the trees, and I found myself following his stare, searching for movement or unusual sounds. The longer I looked, the more the shadows seemed to move and change, creating shapes that might or might not be there. "I need to check something," Ryan said quietly, still not looking in my direction. "Check what?" I kept my voice just as low, though I wasn't sure why. "Something's out there. He stood up slowly, his movement controlled and deliberate. "I'll be right back." "Wait!" I scrambled to my feet, not liking where this was heading. "We agreed to stick together, remember? You said that was one of the most important camping rules." Ryan finally turned to look at me, and for just a second I thought his expression looked strange in the firelight. Different somehow, though I couldn't put my finger on exactly how. "It'll only take a few minutes," he said. "Just need to make sure everything's okay." "Then I'm coming with you." "No." His voice carried an authority I'd never heard before. "Someone needs to stay here and keep the fire going. If it dies out, we'll lose our heat source and our light." That made sense, I guess, but every instinct I had was screaming against letting him walk into those dark woods alone. All day he'd been talking about safety rules and careful planning. Now he wanted to throw both out the window and check out some imaginary noise in the forest. "Ryan, this is crazy. What if something happens to you out there?" "Nothing's going to happen." He was already moving toward the edge of our campsite, heading for the spot where the trees swallowed up our firelight. "Just keep feeding the fire and I'll be back before you know it. At least take a flashlight." But he was already gone, disappearing between the pine trunks like he'd been taken by the darkness itself. I hadn't even heard his footsteps on the forest floor. I stood beside our fire, holding a stick with a half-roasted marshmallow still attached, feeling completely abandoned. The confident, capable feeling I'd built up over the course of our day disappeared immediately. Without Ryan's steady presence and expertise, the wilderness around me changed from an exciting challenge into something that felt threatening and unpredictable. The fire popped and sent up a shower of orange sparks. I added another piece of wood, following Ryan's earlier instructions about keeping steady heat. The flames climbed higher, pushing back the darkness by maybe another foot or two, but that only seemed to make the surrounding forest feel more scary. Minutes went by slowly with no sign of Ryan's return. I tried to stay calm by focusing on practical tasks, organizing our remaining firewood, checking that our water bottles were secure, making sure the tent stakes were still tight. But every few seconds I found myself looking toward the trees where he'd gone, hoping to see his shape coming out of the shadows. "Ryan," I called out, keeping my voice loud enough to carry, but not so loud that it would wake up every animal within a mile radius. No response. Not even the sound of movement through the brush. I tried again a few minutes later, calling louder into the forest. "Ryan, how much longer?" Still nothing. The quiet from the woods felt weird, like even the normal nighttime sounds had stopped. No bird calls, no small animals moving through fallen leaves, no distant crack of settling branches. Just the stream beside our camp and the whisper of wind through pine needles high above. 20 minutes passed, then 25. My earlier good mood had been completely replaced by growing worry. This wasn't like Ryan at all. Even when he was focused on teaching me new skills, he kept talking, checking my understanding and offering encouragement. He wouldn't just disappear into the forest and leave me sitting here wondering what was happening. I thought about going after him, but his instructions about keeping the fire going kept running through my head. He'd stressed how important it was to never let our heat source die out, especially at this altitude where temperatures could drop dramatically after sunset. If I left to search for him and something happened to the fire, we could both end up in serious trouble. Strange noises started coming out of the woods around the 30-minute mark, snapping branches that sounded too loud and deliberate to be caused by small animals. Rustling that seemed to move in circles rather than traveling in one direction like a deer or elk would. At one point, I heard what might have been a low thudding sound, rhythmic and heavy, but it stopped before I could figure out what might be causing it. "Ryan!" I shouted, abandoning any pretense of staying quiet. "Where are you?" The noises stopped immediately, like whatever was making them had heard my voice and decided to pause, The sudden silence was somehow worse than the unexplained sounds had been. I added more wood to the fire, building it higher than necessary. The increased light provided some psychological comfort, even though I knew it wouldn't help me see very far into the dense forest. The flames made dancing shadows that made everything beyond our campsite look like it was moving and changing position. I was shaking slightly as I arranged the wood, though whether from cold or nerves, I couldn't tell. The temperature had dropped significantly since Ryan left, and without his presence to anchor my confidence, every shadow looked potentially threatening. 40 minutes, then 45. I was seriously considering breaking his instructions and going to look for him when I heard footsteps approaching through the trees. Heavy, deliberate steps that crashed through the bushes without any attempt at stealth. "Ryan?" I called toward the sound. The footsteps paused, then started up again, getting closer to our campsite. A figure I knew came out of the darkness beyond the firelight, and relief hit me so hard that my knees felt weak. Ryan walked back into the circle of our campfire's light, and I immediately started talking. "Thank God you're okay. I was getting really worried. What were you doing out there? Did you find whatever you were looking for?" But as he moved closer to the fire, something made me stop talking. Something about the way he was walking, or holding himself, or... I couldn't figure out what exactly was wrong, but something definitely was. Ryan looked at me and smiled, but the expression didn't look quite right on his face. The relief I'd felt at seeing Ryan come out of the darkness disappeared the moment he stepped fully into the firelight. Mud streaked across his face in thick, dark smears that looked like he'd been lying face down in swampy ground. His jacket and pants were caked with the same dark earth, and bits of leaves and debris clung to his hair like he'd been crawling through brush. But it wasn't the mud that made my stomach tighten with worry. It was his face. Ryan's known features were all there. The same brown eyes, the same slightly crooked nose he'd broken falling off his bike in middle school, the same mess of dark hair that never stayed combed. But something basic was wrong with how they fit together. His mouth curved upward in what should have been a reassuring smile, yet it looked like someone had arranged his facial muscles without understanding what a real smile was supposed to show. "Ryan?" I said, my voice coming out smaller than I'd intended. "What happened to you out there?" He sat down on his log across from me with movements that felt too precise, too planned. Every gesture looked rehearsed rather than natural, like he was focusing on how to sit properly. The Ryan I knew moved with easy confidence, flopping down wherever was convenient and adjusting his position without thinking about it. "Just checking the perimeter," he said, that strange smile never wavering, "making sure we don't have any animal problems." The explanation hit me wrong immediately. In all our conversations about camping safety, Ryan had never once mentioned concerns about wildlife wandering into our campsite. He talked about proper food storage and keeping a clean camp, but never about animals being a direct threat that required perimeter checks. Bears and mountain lions, according to Ryan's earlier explanations, avoided human contact and would smell our fire from miles away. "Animal problems?" I asked. "You never said anything about that before." "Better safe than sorry." His response came too quickly, like he'd prepared it in advance. I studied his face in the flashing firelight, trying to figure out what exactly was making my skin crawl. His eyes looked right, but felt wrong, focused on me with an intensity that didn't match casual conversation. Ryan's usual manner was relaxed and friendly, full of easy grins and casual observations. This version sat perfectly still, watching me with unwavering attention that felt more like examination than friendship. "Where exactly did you go?" I pressed. "You were gone for almost an hour." "Around the area, checking for tracks, signs of animal activity." Each word came out measured and deliberate, like he was reading from a script. "Found some interesting things in the mud near the stream." That explained the dirt covering his clothes, I supposed, but it still didn't make sense. The stream ran clear over smooth rocks with sandy banks. I hadn't seen any muddy areas during our earlier water collection, and certainly nothing that would explain why Ryan looked like he'd been wrestling in a swamp. He leaned forward slightly, and the firelight caught his expression in a way that made me move uncomfortably on my log. "Tell me about your parents," he said. The question came out of nowhere, completely unrelated to our conversation about his mysterious expedition into the woods. I blinked at him, confused by the sudden topic change. "What do you mean?" "Their work schedules. When do they usually get home?" His head tilted slightly, like he was genuinely curious about information he'd never heard before. A cold feeling started spreading through my chest. Ryan knew my parents' schedules better than I did. He'd been eating dinner at our house for years, timing his visits perfectly to avoid my mother's late meetings and my father's weekend projects. He knew when they traveled, when they worked overtime, when they'd be around to drive us places or help with homework. "Ryan, you know all that stuff already," I said slowly. "You've been coming over since we were kids." "Humor me." That smile stretched a little wider, showing teeth that looked perfectly normal but felt threatening. "I want to make sure I have the details right." The way he said details made my scalp prickle. This wasn't friendly conversation or casual interest. This felt like an interrogation, like he was gathering information for some specific purpose I couldn't begin to guess. "Why do you need to know?" I asked, instead of answering. "Just curious about your family situation." His voice remained perfectly pleasant, but the words carried an undertone that made me want to back away from the fire. "Do they know exactly where we're camping? Did you tell them about this specific location?" My hand started shaking a little, and I pressed them together to hide it. These weren't questions Ryan would ask. He'd been there for most of my conversations with my parents about this trip. He'd told my mother personally about our safety plans and location. He'd shaken my father's hand and promised to take good care of me. "Of course they know where we are," I said, though that wasn't entirely true. We'd told them the general area and trail system, but this unmarked campsite wasn't on any map Ryan could have shown them. "Good." He nodded approvingly, like my answer satisfied some internal checklist. "And they're expecting you back tomorrow afternoon?" "Yeah." The single word came out as barely more than a whisper. Ryan, or whatever was wearing Ryan's face, continued staring at me with that unsettling intensity. The comfortable camaraderie we'd built throughout the day had vanished completely, replaced by an atmosphere that felt dangerous in ways I couldn't articulate. "We should stay an extra night," he announced suddenly. "Really make the most of this trip." The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. Every instinct I possessed was screaming that I needed to get away from this person, away from this campsite, away from whatever wrongness had infected our perfect outdoor adventure. "I can't," I said quickly, grasping for any excuse that would get me out of here. "I promised my mom I'd be home early tomorrow. She's got that family dinner thing planned." There was no family dinner. My mother would be happy to see me whenever I returned, probably with a dozen questions about our camping experience. But the lie came easily, driven by panic I didn't fully understand. "Your mother will understand if you call and explain," he said, still wearing that horrible smile. "We're having such a good time learning outdoor skills. Don't you want to practice more shooting tomorrow?" The way he said "good time" made it sound like a threat. I stood up abruptly, my legs unsteady but determined to put some distance between us. "No, I really need to get back." I moved toward our tent, trying to keep my voice casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Thanks for everything today, but I should pack up now. It's completely dark out there." His voice followed me as I unzipped the tent fly. "Hiking at night is dangerous. You could get lost or hurt yourself. But these weren't normal circumstances. The person sitting by our campfire might look like Ryan Thompson, might sound like him, might even know details about our friendship and camping trip. But every part of me was convinced that my best friend wasn't behind those eyes anymore. I pulled my sleeping bag from the tent and began stuffing it into my backpack. The camping gear that had seemed so exciting this morning now felt like prison equipment I needed to escape. Tyler. The voice was patient, almost gentle, but it made my skin crawl. You're being irrational. Sit back down and let's talk about this. I ignored him, focusing on cramming my clothes and supplies into the pack as quickly as possible. My movements were clumsy and rushed, but I didn't care about organization or proper packing technique. I just needed to get my gear together and go immediately. Where are you going to go? He asked, still using that reasonable tone that felt like mockery. You don't know these trails well enough to navigate in the dark. That was true. I'd followed Ryan's lead during our entire hike up the mountain, paying attention to the scenery rather than memorizing landmarks or trail markers. Without his guidance, I'd probably get lost within the first mile, but I'd rather spend the night wandering through dark forest than sit here another minute with whatever was pretending to be my friend. I'll figure it out, I said, shouldering my pack and clicking on my flashlight. Ryan made no move to pack his own gear or prepare for departure. He just sat there watching me with that unsettling smile, like my panic and desperate preparations were entertaining rather than concerning. This is a mistake, he said as I checked my pack straps and tested the flashlight beam. You're going to get yourself hurt out there. Maybe. But staying here felt way more dangerous than anything the dark mountain trails could offer. I turned toward the trail that would take me back down the mountain, back toward known suburban streets and the safety of my own house. The beam of my flashlight cut a narrow path through the complete darkness beyond our campfire's reach. I'm hiking back down right now, I announced, not looking back at the thing wearing Ryan's face. Tonight, I stepped onto the trail with my flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the complete darkness ahead. The known path that had seemed manageable during our afternoon climb now looked dangerous and uncertain, with shadows moving around every rock and root that could trip me up. Behind me, I heard the soft crunch of footsteps on the forest floor. Ryan was following. That should have been reassuring. Having an experienced hiker with me down the mountain was obviously safer than attempting the descent alone. But instead of relief, his presence sent cold dread crawling up my spine. The footsteps kept a steady rhythm about 10 feet behind me, never getting closer, never falling back. I focused on placing each step carefully, testing loose rocks before putting my full weight down and using my free hand to steady myself against tree trunks when the path grew steep. The flashlight beam showed maybe 6 feet of trail ahead, leaving everything beyond that swallowed by thick blackness. Pine branches reached across the path at head height, forcing me to duck and weave around obstacles I could barely see coming. "Watch that root," I called back, pointing my light toward a thick pine root that stretched across the trail like a tripwire. No response. Just the continued sound of steady footsteps moving around the obstacle I'd warned about. The silence felt heavy, pressing down on the forest around us. During our hike up the mountain, Ryan had kept up a constant stream of commentary about trail conditions, local wildlife, proper hiking technique, and random stories about previous camping trips with his brother Sean. He'd pointed out interesting rock formations, identified bird calls, and shared detailed explanations about everything we encountered. Now he moved through the darkness without saying a word. "This section's pretty steep," I said, after we'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes. "Remember you said the switchbacks would be tricky in the dark?" Silence. Just those steady footsteps keeping pace behind me. I tried again a few minutes later when my flashlight showed a section where the trail split around a huge boulder. "Which way do we go here? Left or right?" "Right," came the flat single-word response. The word carried no emotion, no explanation, no hint of the detailed answers Ryan usually gave about which way to go. Just a basic answer that felt like it came from someone reading trail directions off a card. My hands were shaking a little as I held the flashlight, though I couldn't tell if it was from cold or nerves. The temperature had dropped a lot since we'd left the warmth of our campfire, and my breath made small puffs of vapor in the beam of my light. But the physical cold felt minor compared to how creeped out I was by Ryan's weird behavior. Every few minutes I looked back, swinging my flashlight beam to check on him. Each time, the light showed the same thing. Ryan walking steadily along the trail, keeping that exact same distance, wearing that same wrong smile. He never stumbled, never stopped to check his footing, never showed any sign of trouble walking the rocky path in near total darkness. That bothered me more than I could explain. I was struggling with every step of this descent, testing each foothold and grabbing branches for support when the trail got steep. My legs felt unsteady from the long day of hiking, and the heavy pack threw off my balance on the tougher sections. But Ryan moved with perfect confidence, like he could see the entire trail clearly mapped out ahead of him. "How are you not having trouble with this?" I asked during a particularly tricky stretch where loose rocks made every step treacherous. "Fine," came the immediate response. Not "I'm fine," or "this section's not too bad," or any of the reassuring explanations Ryan would normally provide. Just that single, flat word that told me nothing, and somehow made everything feel worse. The descent felt endless. My cheap flashlight began dimming after the first hour, the beam growing weaker and more yellow as the batteries drained. I should have thought to bring backup batteries, but this morning's packing had been focused on excitement rather than practical preparation. Now I was paying for that oversight as my only source of light slowly failed. "My flashlight's dying," I announced, hoping this might prompt some helpful suggestion about battery conservation or alternative lighting sources. No response at all. The footsteps behind me kept going without stopping or saying anything. I started saving the flashlight battery, turning it off when the trail looked straight and clear, then clicking it back on when I needed to get around obstacles or check where I was stepping. This made the walk even more nerve-wracking, with long stretches of walking through complete darkness while trusting that the path kept going ahead. During one of these dark parts, I almost walked straight into a low-hanging branch that would have caught me across the face. Only a last-second instinct made me duck, feeling pine needles brush against my hair as I passed underneath. "There's a low branch here," I called back, clicking my light on to illuminate the hazard. Again, no response. No thanks for the warning, no talk about trail maintenance or seasonal growth patterns. Nothing. The wrongness of it all was becoming too much. This wasn't how Ryan acted under any circumstances. Even when he was focused or working on something challenging, he kept up that constant stream of observations and conversation. Silence was simply not part of his personality, but the thing following me down this mountain trail had no interest in talking. We reached another rest stop where granite boulders provided flat surfaces for sitting and catching our breath. During our afternoon climb up, Ryan had pointed out this as the halfway point and suggested we take water breaks here. Now I desperately needed to rest my aching legs and check my remaining gear. I sat down on the nearest flat rock and pulled out my water bottle, taking careful sips while listening for any sound from my companion. The footsteps had stopped when I stopped, but I heard no rustling of gear, no sounds of someone sitting down for a rest, no quiet breathing that would show another person nearby. "You okay back there?" I asked the darkness. "Yes." The response came from exactly the same location where the footsteps had stopped, but I couldn't see anything when I aimed my dying flashlight in that direction. Just empty trail disappearing into black forest. I stayed seated for maybe 5 minutes, hoping the rest would help my shaking legs and give me time to think through what was happening. But the heavy silence made relaxation impossible. Every few seconds, I swept my light beam across the trail behind me, and each time the weak yellow glow showed nothing but pine trees and rocky ground. "Ready to keep going?" I asked, standing up and shouldering my pack. "Yes," came that same flat response from the darkness. As soon as I started walking, the footsteps started up again in their steady pattern 10 feet behind me. Never closer, never farther, keeping that exact same distance like something was measuring the space between us. The final hour going down was the hardest. My flashlight had gotten so weak, it barely gave off any light, so I had to move slowly and feel around for good footing. The trail got steeper as we got closer to the bottom of the mountain, with loose gravel that moved under my feet and sent small rocks rolling down the slope ahead of me. I fell twice during this part, catching myself on my hands and knees when my foot slipped on unsteady ground. Both times I called back warnings about the dangerous conditions, and both times got no response. The footsteps behind me never stopped or showed any sign of trouble with the same obstacles that were giving me so much problems. By the time I saw the first streetlight shining through the trees ahead, my nerves were completely shot. The orange glow of suburban lighting had never looked so welcoming, meaning safety and normal life after hours of walking through dangerous darkness with something that wore my best friend's face. The trail ended at a residential street about 3 blocks from my house. I stepped onto the asphalt and turned around, finally able to see more than just a few feet in any direction, thanks to the streetlights. Ryan stood exactly where the trail met the pavement, not moving in the pale orange light. His clothes were still clean of the mud and debris that had covered him at the campsite, as if the long hike through rough forest conditions hadn't affected him at all. That wrong smile stayed on his face, and his eyes reflected the streetlight in a way that made my stomach turn with fresh worry. "Well," I said, my voice sounding artificially cheerful in the sudden quiet of sleeping suburbia. "Thanks for coming down with me. I guess I'll see you later." He didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there watching me with those eyes that looked like Ryan's but felt completely different. I waited for him to say something about getting his gear from the campsite, or making plans for getting his tent and camping equipment, or at least saying something about the outdoor adventure we'd shared. Instead, he stayed perfectly still, like a statue positioned at the entrance to the mountain trail. "Are you going back up to get your stuff?" I tried. Nothing. The smile never went away, and those wrong eyes never stopped staring at me. A chill that had nothing to do with the cool night air ran through my body. I backed away slowly, my footsteps bouncing off the quiet houses around us. "Okay then, I'll talk to you soon." Still no response, no goodbye. No acknowledgement, no sign that the thing standing at the trail entrance had ever been my friend, or cared about our years of friendship. I turned and walked quickly toward my house, my backpack bouncing with each hurried step. At the first corner, I looked back and saw the figure still standing in exactly the same position, outlined against the streetlight like a motionless guard at the entrance to the dark mountain trail. 2 blocks later, I looked back again. The figure stayed in place, not moving. Even when I reached my front porch and fumbled for my house keys, I could still see that distant shape standing beneath the streetlight, waiting, watching, wearing Ryan Thompson's face while being something else entirely. I unlocked the front door and slipped inside, immediately turning the deadbolt behind me. Through the living room window, I could just make out the streetlight where I had left that thing standing, but from this distance, I couldn't tell if it was still there or not. The warmth and safety of my own house felt like a blessing after hours of growing dread in the mountain darkness. But even surrounded by comfortable furniture and family photos, I couldn't shake the image of those wrong eyes staring at me with patient, inhuman interest. Whatever had followed me down that trail, it wasn't my best friend Ryan Thompson, and the realization that something else had been wearing his face Learning about my family, asking about my parents' schedules, filled me with a terror I'd never experienced before. I woke up late Sunday morning with sunlight coming through my bedroom curtains and the uncomfortable feeling that something big had changed in my world. The digital clock on my nightstand said 11:47 a.m., which meant I'd slept for nearly 12 hours since getting into bed after that nightmare hike down the mountain. Rolling over, I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and scrolled to Ryan's number. My thumb stayed over the call button for a moment before I pressed it, listening to the familiar ringtone while looking at the ceiling. Straight to voicemail. Ryan's cheerful recorded voice told me to leave a message and he'd get back to me soon. "Hey, it's me," I said after the beep. "Just wanted to make sure you made it back up the mountain okay and got all your gear. Call me back when you get this." I hung up and set the phone aside, but the knot in my stomach didn't go away. Ryan always had his phone with him. Always. He'd answer calls during family dinners, text back within minutes of getting messages, and get really annoyed when his battery died and he couldn't stay connected. The shower helped wash away the dirt and sweat from our hiking adventure, but it couldn't clean away the memory of that wrong smile or those questions about my parents' schedules. Standing under the hot water, I kept replaying our final conversation at the campsite, trying to convince myself that being tired and it being dark had made Ryan's behavior seem stranger than it actually was. Maybe he'd been more tired than he let on. Maybe the stress of leading an inexperienced hiker through difficult terrain had affected his usual cheerful personality. Maybe that weird interrogation about my family had been his awkward way of making conversation while dealing with being tired. But even as I tried to rationalize what had happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been seriously wrong with my best friend. Downstairs, I found my parents reading the Sunday paper over coffee and leftover pancakes. Mom looked up when I entered the kitchen, her face lighting up with the kind of parental interest that meant I was about to face detailed questioning. "There's our wilderness explorer," she said, setting down the local news section. "How was your big camping adventure? Did you boys have fun up there?" "Yeah, it was good," I said, pouring orange juice and settling into my usual chair. "Ryan taught me a lot about outdoor stuff." "Did you build fires and do all that survival training Ryan was talking about?" Dad asked, glancing up from the sports page. "We did some of that." I took a sip of juice, buying time to figure out how much detail to share. "Shot some targets, learned about setting up camp properly." "And you felt safe the whole time?" Mom's voice carried the edge of concern that had colored most of our pre-trip conversations. "No problems with wildlife or getting lost?" "Everything was fine. Ryan really knows what he's doing out there." This wasn't technically a lie. Ryan clearly did know wilderness skills, and we hadn't run into any actual wildlife problems. I was just leaving out the part where my experienced guide had turned into something that made my skin crawl. "Well, I'm glad you're home safe," Mom said, reaching over to squeeze my shoulder, "though I have to admit I'm a little surprised you came back a day early. I thought you boys were planning to camp 2 nights. Heat crept up my neck as I scrambled for an explanation that wouldn't raise more questions. "We got through all the stuff Ryan wanted to teach me faster than expected. Seemed like a good time to head back." Dad nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking. Better to come home with a positive experience than push things too far and end up miserable." The conversation moved on to other topics, but I could feel Mom's occasional glances in my direction, like she sensed there was more to the story than I was sharing. I finished breakfast quickly and went back to my room, claiming I needed to unpack and do laundry. Around 2 o'clock, I tried calling Ryan again. Straight to voicemail. The rest of Sunday crawled by slowly. I tried watching television, playing video games, even starting homework for Monday's classes, but nothing could hold my attention for more than a few minutes. Every time my phone buzzed with a text notification, I lunged for it, hoping to see Ryan's name, only to find messages from other friends or promotional garbage from various apps. By evening, I'd called Ryan's number 6 more times. Each call went directly to voicemail without ringing, which meant his phone was either turned off or completely dead. Neither option made sense for someone who treated his phone like a vital organ. Monday morning brought the start of a new school week and my first real chance to figure out what was going on with Ryan. I arrived at school early, positioning myself near his locker to catch him before first period. Students flowed through the hallways in their usual pre-class chaos, but Ryan's familiar figure never appeared among them. First period started without him, then second period. By lunch, I was actively looking around every face in the cafeteria, hoping to spot him at our usual table or in line buying pizza. Nothing. I spent the afternoon classes distracted and worried, barely absorbing anything my teachers said while constantly checking the door for late arrivals. When the final bell rang and students flooded toward the parking lot and bus lines, I walked past Ryan's locker one more time, noting that it looked exactly the same as it had that morning. At home, I called his number again before starting homework. Voicemail. I left another message, trying to keep my voice casual. Hey Ryan, just wondering where you were today. Give me a call when you get this, okay? Tuesday followed the same pattern. Empty locker, absent from all his usual classes, no response to my increasingly frequent phone calls. I found myself paying attention to conversations around me, listening for any mention of Ryan's name or speculation about his absence. Wednesday brought the first hint that other people were starting to notice. During chemistry class, our lab partner Jessica asked if I knew where Ryan was, since their group project was due Friday and she hadn't been able to reach him. He's probably just sick, I said, though the explanation felt hollow even as I spoke it. I'm sure he'll be back soon. He's been out 3 days, Jessica pointed out. That's like really sick. Yeah, I thought, really sick. Or really gone. Or really not Ryan at all anymore. Wednesday evening, I sat on my bed staring at my phone and thinking about options I didn't want to explore. I could call the Thompson house directly and ask to speak with Ryan. I could bike over there and knock on their door, claiming I needed to borrow something. I could tell my parents about Ryan's weird behavior during our camping trip and let them decide whether adults needed to get involved. But each possibility felt full of complications I wasn't ready to handle. What if Ryan answered his house phone and acted completely normal? What if his parents said he was fine and I looked like a paranoid idiot? What if I told my parents about that weird conversation at the campsite and they decided I was having some kind of psychological episode? I called his cell one more time before bed. Voicemail. Thursday morning, I arrived at school with a knot of worry that had been growing all week. Ryan's locker remained untouched, his classes continued without him, and I was starting to attract questions from teachers who knew we were close friends. Have you heard from Ryan Thompson lately? Mrs. Patterson asked after English class. He's missed several assignments this week. No, I haven't talked to him recently, I said, which was technically true if you didn't count one-sided voicemail messages. Well, if you do speak with him, please remind him that he needs to contact the main office about his extended absence. We're required to follow up on students who miss more than 3 consecutive days. The official concern made everything feel more real and more frightening. This wasn't just my imagination or paranoia anymore. Other people were noticing that Ryan Thompson had vanished from his normal life. During lunch, I overheard a group of sophomores talking about weekend plans, and one of them mentioned that Ryan was supposed to help with some kind of garage sale but never showed up. Another student in my afternoon history class asked if I knew whether Ryan was planning to quit the track team, since he'd missed 3 practices without explanation. By Thursday evening, I was seriously considering telling my parents everything. The strange questions about their schedules, the wrong smile, the way Ryan had moved through the dark forest with impossible confidence. The fact that he'd been standing motionless under that streetlight when I looked back. But every time I tried to organize these thoughts into something that made sense, they sounded crazy even to me. How could I explain that my best friend had suddenly started acting like a different person? What proof did I have beyond vague feelings and gut instincts? I spent Thursday night lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of a situation that made no logical sense. Friday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching my mood as I trudged through another day of classes without any sign of Ryan. Teachers were beginning to ask more pointed questions about where he was, and I was running out of vague excuses and non-committal responses. During lunch, I sat alone at our usual table, picking at a sandwich while looking around the cafeteria one more time for Ryan's face. The empty chair across from me felt like an accusation, a reminder that I'd somehow failed to help my best friend when he needed it. "Hey, Tyler," a voice said behind me. I turned to see Marcus Chen, a guy from our physics class, standing with his lunch tray. "Mind if I sit? My usual table's full." "Sure," I said, grateful for any distraction from my spiraling thoughts. Marcus settled into the chair across from me and unwrapped a sandwich that looked considerably more appetizing than mine. "So, where's Ryan been all week? You guys have a fight or something?" The question hit me harder than I expected. A fight would have made sense. A fight would have explained everything in simple, understandable terms that didn't require me to question my own sanity. "No fight," I said. "I think he's just sick. Must be pretty bad if he's been out since Monday." Marcus took a bite of his sandwich and studied my face with casual curiosity. "You look kind of stressed about it. Everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine." The lie came automatically, but I could hear the strain in my own voice. "Just worried about him, you know?" Marcus nodded sympathetically, and we finished lunch, talking about other topics. But his observation stuck with me for the rest of the day. I did look stressed. I felt stressed. The constant low-level anxiety about Ryan's disappearance was affecting how I moved through the world, how I interacted with other people, how I focused on basic tasks. Friday afternoon dragged on forever. I found myself watching the clock in each class, counting down minutes until I could go home and figure out what to do next. By the time the final bell rang, I decided that I needed to take some kind of action, even if I wasn't sure what that action should be. At home, I dropped my backpack by the front door and headed straight to my room, intending to finally call the Thompson house directly. If Ryan answered, I'd figure out what to say. If his parents answered, I'd ask to speak with him and see what excuse they gave for his absence. I was pulling my phone from my pocket when it started ringing in my hand. The sudden noise made me jump as I looked at the caller ID. Sean Thompson. I stared at the display for 3 rings, my finger hovering over the answer button while my mind raced through possibilities. Sean was Ryan's older brother, home from college for semester break. He was calling me on a Friday evening, which meant this probably wasn't a casual social call. On the 4th ring, I swiped to answer. "Hello?" I could hear the tremor in Sean Thompson's voice before he even started talking. Something was very wrong. "Tyler, I need to ask you something important," Sean said, his words coming out rushed and unsteady. "When's the last time you saw my brother?" The question caught me off guard. Sean sounded like he'd been crying, or was about to start crying, and the formal way he'd asked about Ryan made my stomach drop. "We went camping last weekend," I said slowly. "Why? What's going on?" "Tyler." Sean's voice cracked, and I heard him take a shaky breath. "Ryan's been reported missing. My parents filed a report on Wednesday when he didn't come home and didn't answer his phone. There have been search teams in the mountains for 2 days looking for him." My mouth went dry. I tried to process what Sean was telling me. Missing? But Ryan had come down the mountain with me. He'd walked me all the way back to the neighborhood, stood under that streetlight watching me with those wrong eyes. But Sean, that doesn't make sense. I started, my voice sounding strange and distant. Ryan came camping with me on Saturday and we hiked back down together that night. He walked me home. I saw him just... Tyler, stop. Sean's voice broke completely. We found him. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat down hard on my bed, my legs suddenly unable to support my weight. What do you mean you found him? Sean was crying now. I could hear it clearly through the phone. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. They found his body this afternoon, in a remote area about 2 miles from where you guys were supposed to be camping. Tyler, the medical examiner, said he's been dead for over a week. The room started spinning around me. My vision blurred at the edges as Sean's words repeated in my head. Dead for over a week. But that was impossible. I'd been with Ryan just 6 days ago. I'd talked to him, hiked with him, learned to shoot his rifle. That can't be right, I said. But my voice sounded hollow and unconvincing even to me. There has to be some mistake. I was with him Saturday night. We came down the trail together. Sean's breathing was rough on the other end of the line. Tyler, listen to me. Ryan, they said his skull was crushed. His body was... He choked on the words. He was decomposed, lying in the mud. They think he fell or something attacked him early last week, maybe even the weekend before you guys went up there. My hand started shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. The room felt like it was tilting sideways, and I had to grip the edge of my bed to keep from falling over. But I talked to him, I whispered. He taught me how to build fires. He showed me how to shoot. We walked down the mountain together in the dark. Tyler. Sean's voice was gentle but firm. Whatever you think happened, it wasn't my brother. Ryan's been dead for days. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the floor. Sean's voice continued speaking, but the words sounded like they were coming from underwater, distant and hard to understand. Dead for over a week. The realization hit me in waves, each one more terrifying than the last. The person who had sat across from me at that campfire, covered in mud and asking strange questions about my parents, hadn't been Ryan Thompson. The thing that had walked me down the mountain trail in perfect silence, moving through darkness with impossible confidence, wearing that wrong smile like an ill-fitting mask. Something else had been using Ryan's face. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. Sean was still talking, his voice thick with grief, but I could barely make out the words. Something about funeral arrangements and telling our friends at school and how sorry he was for breaking the news this way. Sean, I interrupted, my voice cracking. I have to go. I hung up before he could respond and let the phone fall back onto my bed. The safety of my bedroom felt like a lie now, ruined by the knowledge that something had studied me through Ryan's eyes, learned about my family's routines, followed me home through the darkness. That thing had stood under the streetlight at the end of my block, motionless and patient, watching me walk away. It had worn my best friend's face while asking when my parents came home from work, what time they usually went to bed, whether they knew exactly where we'd been camping. My skin crawled as I remembered the way it had moved Ryan's head when asking those questions, like it was filing away useful information for later. The mechanical precision of its movements, the complete absence of warmth behind those brown eyes. I buried my face in my hands and tried to breathe normally, but my chest felt tight, and I was breathing fast. Every detail from that camping trip took on new, horrible meaning. The mud covering its clothes, like it had been digging through forest soil. The unnatural way it had walked that dark trail without stumbling or hesitation. The flat, emotionless responses to my questions and warnings. Whatever had killed my best friend had then put on his appearance like a costume and spent an entire day studying me, learning about me, following me home. I looked toward my bedroom window, half expecting to see that shape standing in the street below, still wearing Ryan's face, still watching with patient, inhuman interest. The glass showed only my own pale, terrified expression staring back. But the memory of those false eyes and that terrible smile would be burned into my mind forever. And as I sat alone in my room, surrounded by the normal, everyday objects of my regular life, one thought kept circling through my head with growing dread. Whatever had pretended to be Ryan Thompson for an entire day might not be done with me yet.